Thank you, Pam. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming and spending some of your, summer learning. You're my kind of people. I love that. It's such an honor to be here. I love the patent organization, and so I really am truly honored that I get to speak with you all today. So a little bit about me. I'm the author of the book Seven Mighty Moves. And the most important thing to know about me is that I am a teacher and I'm currently teaching in the classroom. Well, I guess we're on summer break right now. I've taught kindergarten, I've taught second grade. Right now I'm teaching first grade. I've also taught intervention K-6. Um, and I'm really passionate about literacy and I love talking about literacy. I love teaching reading and writing in my classroom and I love speaking about it. So this is amazing to be here. And that passion really comes from experience I had with my son. And I'm not going to go in very much into his journey today, but I do like to start by just acknowledging him because he's really just the reason that I'm here. My first two children learned to read rather easily, and I was doing all the same things with him. He's my third, and nothing seemed to be working. And I was doing all the things I had been taught in college in my early years of teaching. And I was really kind of embarrassed because I was a teacher and I couldn't help my own son learn to read. And when he was in second grade, we finally did some outside testing and found out that he has dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And that is just when everything changed because it just started me on this learning journey. He was also diagnosed with depression and it all centered around his struggles learning to read. And so I just really witnessed firsthand how tightly connected self-esteem and the ability to read are. And so it's just completely changed me. And that is why I'm so passionate. I saw with him that as his reading improved, his self-esteem improved, and it was a beautiful thing to witness. And so, as I was learning and I was trying things with my son, I was also making changes in my classroom. And I found that I could group or categorize those changes into 7 areas. And those represent the 7 mighty moves that I talk about in my book. And so I'm really excited today because I get to slow things down a little bit and we're going to break these up into 2 parts. So this first part, we're going to be talking about moves 1 through 4 in this first session. And then the second session today is going to be moves 5 through 7. I'm still just giving you, I guess, a little bit of a taste of each of these because I have done, a presentation on each one of these individually, right? And so they each could be a course in and of themselves. So today, I'll tell you a little bit about each move and some application ideas. I am a teacher, and so I present in like how I like what I like about presentations because I always like the takeaway and what can I do and how can I apply this. And so I hope today that you'll get a lot of ideas and things for applying this, um, all this wonderful information. Okay, so let's dive in and we're going to dive into the first move, which is this intentional phonemic awareness. And the thing is this is an area where I had to shift a few times. The first move I had to make was just to know that phonemic awareness was a thing and to start teaching it. I wasn't taught anything about phonemic awareness in college. And I thought, well, maybe that's because I went to school a long time ago. But I have a friend who just graduated about 5 years ago, and she was assigned to teach first grade right after graduating. And she just called me up in a panic and was like, help, I don't know anything about phonemic awareness or blending. And I just thought, oh no, is this, are we still not being taught some of this? So phonemic awareness is that, um, is the understanding that that spoken language can be broken into individual sounds, right? You have the word phoneme, and that's an individual speech sound. You really can see a weakness in this. For example, the student can correctly identify the sounds. So maybe they're reading a word and they go b, at, and then they look up at you and they go say horse, like something completely different. Or maybe it's not that drastic, but maybe they go b, at, bag, or tab, and they say it backwards. All these things are kind of showing, oh, okay, they're struggling in this area. And then we have phonics, and sometimes that we confuse phonics and phonemic awareness. And phonics is that method we use to teach the letter sound combinations, okay? But phonemic awareness is being conscious and aware of those sounds. Now, and this was just what the first thing I had to do was learn that phonemic awareness was a thing, and I needed to start teaching this in my classroom. So that is one of the first things I started to do. But then as my learning grew, I could refine my knowledge, and I had to shift again and do some more moves within this area. And these are some of the things that I learned. That these sessions, phonemic awareness sessions, can be brief. We don't need to spend like 15, 20 or more minutes on just oral only phonemic awareness. The National Reading Panel found about 18 hours of instruction for the whole kindergarten year. And more recently, there was a meta-analysis came out in January, and they found 10 hours of instruction for the whole year. And so this like breaks down to maybe a few minutes a day of phonemic awareness. And then I also learned that we need to get to the phoneme level. That is where you get the most bang for your buck. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But before we may have thought, oh, they've got to master the larger units before we work on the phonemes. And so, I've heard teachers say, well, they can't rhyme. So we just keep working on rhyming and rhyming and rhyming. But you think, what do they need to read? They need to be able to blend and segment those individual phonemes. And so there's research that we can bypass work on the larger units and start right at the phoneme level. Now there's, more to talk about that, because that's average, right? And you might find that some students need a little more help and preparation to get to the phoneme level. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the goal, I'm always thinking, we need to get to the phoneme level as quickly as we can, because that's going to impact their reading and writing. And then I also learned that we can connect our phonemic awareness with letters. And this can be really confusing, because you think, well, when you can connect it with letters, then it's phonics. It's phonics and it's phonemic awareness. And we can do both at the same time. And it's been shown to be very, very effective. And I'll give you some examples of that in just a minute. So let's talk about blending and segmenting. These are the most critical skills of phonemic awareness, because you think, what do they need to be able to read? Well, they need to take those individual sounds, at, and they need to blend those individual sounds together to read, sat. And then what about segmenting? Well, segmenting now, they've got to break apart those individual sounds, and that's what they have to do in order to spell. They have to think, okay, I want to write hop. I have to think hop, and they've got to break that down and then write it. Okay, so what I like to do, now, I just told you that it's so effective to combine your phonemic awareness with letters, but I do a quick little blending and segmenting warm up before my phonics instruction to prepare my students, to get them a little practice. And it just takes a minute. And to do that, I sing a couple little songs that I learned from Elise from Kindergarten Readers. And so when we're going to blend and we're sitting at the carpet in the morning, and I'm going to have them practice blending some sounds, I'll sing this song. I go, slide, slide, slippity slide. When I say the sounds, you're going to make them glide. And then I'm going to give them some sounds. B, o, t. And they're going to say boat. O, o, t. And they're going to say float. O, load. And, you know, I might just do 5 to 10 words very fast. And then we're going to practice segmenting. And the segmenting song I sing goes, break it down, break it down, break it down, break it down, break it down. When I say the words, you say the sounds, break it down. And now I tell them the word. Boat. They go, boat. Loaf. Loaf. And we do a few. So again, it only takes a minute or two. And it's prepping them, like you just heard, I'm using some words that maybe we're just about to have a lesson on that Val Team OA. And I just prepped them for that and got them ready, and we practiced some of that blending and segmenting. Okay, now that's all fine and great for the kids that it's easy, but what I want to talk about today is how to scaffold blending and segmenting phonemes. So what are you going to do when students are struggling and have a hard time with these two tasks? So let's talk about that. All right. So you can see on the very right here, this syllable structure. This comes from Dr. Louisa Moats. And we have the C represents consonant phonemes, the V represents vowel phonemes, so consonant sounds and vowel sounds. And it's harder to blend or segment words with more phonemes. That's going to be harder for students. It's also going to be more difficult to blend phonemes when you see the two C's together, like that's two consonant sounds together. That can be difficult too, because think of the word like flag would be an example of the CCVC. And that blend or that consonant cluster, the F and the L, some students are going to struggle with that. It's just a little bit harder to segment those because it makes two different sounds, right? It represents two different sounds, but they blend so easily together that it can be hard for students to segment that, okay? So let's say you have a student and they cannot blend or segment a CVC word. Like you have cat, you have sat, you have pig, all of those, and they struggle with that. Well, then what can you do? So one thing you can do is to make it easier is to have less phonemes. So if they can't blend or segment 3 phonemes, you can try 2 phonemes. Now, I have found that a lot of students will still struggle with 2 phonemes. Sometimes I think it's because a lot of the 2 phoneme words are maybe a little bit harder to visualize because they're like me, too. Well, that's 2 isn't a good example since it's irregular, but if, you know, there's nothing, it's like not a noun, it's a little bit harder. And I find it's a little bit easier to go to some larger chunks here for some students. Now, remember, the goal is the phoneme level. So if you do some prep with some larger chunks, you're just always thinking about the goals to get them to the phoneme level. So you don't want to get stuck doing the larger chunks for a huge amount of time. So I like to do what's called body coda blending. So if I have the word map and the student can't blend map, or even when you're holding it out, map, and they can't blend that, what I can do is body coda. I can cover that last sound and we go ma, ma, and then I show them the P, map. And I have found that a lot of students find that like they can be more successful with that. So what I might do for that student is keep practicing the body coda. And then I'm going to say, okay, and now we're going to go back to individual phonemes to see if they can blend that. If you look here, I have this, it says onset rhyme, and then body coda, and then syllables, and then compound words. So I have these arrows because if they struggle, like if they struggle with that body coda and they can't do it, then I'm going to prep them with some syllable work. This is one idea. I'm going to show you other ideas too. If I might say, okay, listen to this, pencil. You put it together, pencil. If they struggle blending syllables, I might do compound words. That's going to be easier. Cup, cake. Oh, cupcake. And they might get the idea. And then I can go to syllables. And then I can go back to body coda. And then I'll go to individual phonemes. And I can do that all in a session. Or I might say, oh, I need to spend a couple days with a student doing this. and then getting to the phoneme level. But again, the whole goal is to get to the phoneme level. So I'm only doing work with the larger chunks to prep that student, to help prime them and get them ready and to try to get them to the phoneme level. All right, so this is the first scaffold to consider for a student who is struggling to blend or segment, is to consider how many phonemes are in the word. Do I need to go to less phonemes? All right. Then if they're struggling with that, can I help prepare them by doing some work at the larger unit to prepare them for work at the individual unit? Okay. And then let's go here. And I want you to look at these two words. We have the word top and we have the word sun. And which word is going to be more difficult for a student to blend when they're reading? Okay, which one? Did you say top? Top is more difficult. Why? All right, if you look at the sounds in these words, the sounds in the word sun can all be stretched out. They can be held as long as you have the breath for. They're continuous sounds. Sun, right? But the word top, we can't stretch. We have that t and that p are stop sounds. You can't stretch them out. All right. And we couldn't go t, 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 t. That's just not very helpful, right? So we have t and the p. And so words with stop sounds are a little more hard. So if you have a student who's struggling with blending or segmenting, one of the first things you could do is use continuous sounds to practice with them. So if you use words that start with any of these sounds, all those sounds can be stretched out. So they're going to be a little easier for students to blend. Okay, so that's another scaffold that you can use, is continuous sounds. All right. And of course you start there and then eventually they are going to have to practice with the stop sounds. All right, another thing you can do is use pictures. So if you have a student and you're practicing some sounds and they can't blend them together, I like to use some picture support. Also very helpful for some of your English learners that are still learning some of those words that you're using. So I might have this and I might say, listen, ch, e, z. And they have the picture support there, and then they can, that's going to help as a scaffold, and they can point to the word and they can say cheese and blend it. Okay, so using pictures is helpful. Again, if I'm having to back up with students because they're really struggling to blend, and I need to use the compound words, again, I could have the picture support, which is helping them learn that. Well, it's going to help them, and it might help them with the tier 1 vocabulary if they need to learn that as well. But again, I always want to caution when I'm saying to do some work on compound words, that is very brief. It is just to prepare them. Once they can do work at the phoneme level, you want to keep it at the phoneme level. Okay, and then as they're blending, as they read, now, you know, if you have words with continuous sounds, it's so great to teach them from the beginning to hold out and stretch out those sounds. Fat, fat, that's so easy. But when they come to cat and they struggle with blending, what can we do to help them with that word because it has stop sounds? And again, this is kind of related to how I was talking about, I like that body coda, which I didn't explain this before, but body coda is a little different than onset rhyme. Onset rhyme, you start with anything before the vowel, and the rhyme is the vowel and anything after the vowel, like k, at. All right, but body coda is now you put that vowel with the initial consonant, so it's the vowel and anything preceding it is the body, like ka, and then anything after the vowel is the coda. T. And I have just found that students find that easier to blend. So I'm going to, if they're reading the word cat, like on this page, I'm going to cover the T and they're going to say k, ah, and then I'm going to help them put those two sounds together. ca, and then I'm going to unveil the T, and then they're going to be going cat, cat. And I really find that it helps them to remember. So if you have students that really kind of struggle to remember, they go k, at, and then they blend it, they say like cab or something. They change that last sound because they're having trouble remembering. When I have them blend the first two together, ca, and then unveil the T, t, cat, it's like they can remember that better. They can hold on to it. So initially, they're going to be doing those sounds separate, k, ah, and then I'm saying put them together, cat. But the goal is to get them to just put the first two together right away. And as they get better at it and get in the habit, they'll be able to go cat, cat, right? And then as they get better, they'll be able to just blend the whole word right away. Okay, so that is another scaffold for blending. Okay, segmenting, again, it's just the idea of phonemic awareness is so abstract. So I find that using motions can really help make it concrete. And it also just helps to keep the students doing something and engaged. So we can do it on our arms, the initial sound here, middle, end, and students can segment the sounds using their arms. We can use our fingers. And we use our fingers a lot, and especially in our phonics lessons when we're doing dictation. First, we're going to segment the sound, and then they're going to write the word. Using manipulatives is another way just to make it a little more concrete and to make it fun. And especially when I taught kindergarten, especially you're doing a lot of this before they even know all their letters yet. So it's nice to have these manipulatives to make it concrete before they've learned all their letters. And when I taught kindergarten, we would use little race cars, and the word is bed, and they go b, e, d, bed, and they drive their car. Or the bingo chips, or the slinkies at the very beginning. We're just showing them how we're taking a word and stretching it out. Now, my warning is that you want to really be careful when you're using manipulatives. You need to have very good management because you don't want the manipulative to become a distraction, and you don't want to lose those precious instructional minutes managing the things. So that's like my caution there, is that you just want to make sure that when you're using manipulatives, they're using them appropriately. You can get them out quickly, you can put them away quickly, and that's not distracting from the task on hand. Okay. But I love this. Like you can see, I have those little Elkonin boxes, the sound boxes, and they push the bingo chip up. And then when they know their letters, guess what? You can move the bingo chip, and they can write the letter right on the that card because it's dry erase, and they can erase it. And the puppets too. I love using the puppets when we just want a lot of practice. And it's just, for some students, they might struggle with their attention or even the motivation, and just having something like this to make it fun. It's just really cute. My students will be like, get really excited coming back to small group because they get to, because it's fun for them. Again, the Elkonin boxes, I mean, who doesn't have a million Unifix cubes in the classroom? So using those, and then like I said, then you can remove those and you can add the letter. Focusing on articulation is really helpful with phonemic awareness too. So pointing to our mouth, we can draw attention to the mouth, especially, in these younger grades, they all confuse the TH and F, right? The th and the f. A lot of them are still learning how to produce that sound. So showing them, oh, look, you wrote bath. Look at my mouth, bath, but I want you to write bath. And we're look at the difference that our mouth is making in those phonemes. And then, yes, we do, which I've talked a little bit about this, but we do also want to connect the phonemic awareness with letters. You can see here how you can see the student has the Unifix cubes, and then we added the grapheme, and So that is an example. That's a way you're connecting both. And another wonderful way to connect both phonemic awareness with letters is word chaining. I love doing word chains. And so here's an example of word chains. In a word chain, you're asking them to change just one sound or spelling at a time. So I say, write tap, change tap to top. And think about what the child has to do in this task. Well, they've got to segment those sounds. They've got to isolate the one that changed. They got to substitute it with a new sound, and then they have to blend it back together. Look at all those phonemic awareness tasks they need to do. And you're doing it with letters. If a student is struggling, I can say, oh, look, listen, tap, change tap to top. And I'm going to help scaffold them by pointing a little bit. Oh, okay, yes. And they erase the A and change it to O. Okay, then I'm saying change top to shop. Top to shop. Which sound changed? Yes, they erased the T, they put the SH. Okay, so now they put two letters, but remember, this is still just one sound. We're changing one sound or one phoneme at a time. All right, now look at my example on the right here. And I want you to think about now how the task is different. It says, write tap, change the A to O. Now, what's the new word? Student says top. Then I say, okay, change the T to SH. What's the new word? Shop. So how did the task change? And I know we've had to disable the chat, but I just want you to think about that for a minute. What's different from the one on the left to the one on the right? And you can see the one on the right now, it's more of a decoding task. I just told them which one to change, and now they have to read the word, right? So which one is harder, the one on the left or the one on the right? I think the one on the left is more difficult. And so because I'm not, they have to figure out which sound changed. And that is a more difficult phonemic awareness task because like I said, they're segmenting, they're isolating, they're substituting, they're blending back. They're having to do all those things versus on the one on the right, you're kind of doing it for them and they're decoding, which is wonderful. So they're blending, but they're not doing the other things. Now it's great to do both of these and you can flip back and forth. Even in one word chain, doing it the two different ways. I will spend more time on the one on the left because it's harder and my goal is to strengthen the phonemic awareness, then I'm spending a little more time on the left. Okay, I got to keep moving because we have a couple more moves to talk about in this first session. So just think about the things that I've talked about. And if you have a piece of paper, I want you to pull it out and jot down, how did we talk about how can you make blending and segmenting easier? What could we do to make it easier for a student who's struggling? And then think about how could you make it more challenging? Just take a few seconds to think about that. And then this is the list that I made. How can you make it easier? Some of the things we talked about. Well, you can use the manipulatives to make it easier, to make the task a little more concrete. You can use gestures. You can focus on the articulation. You can use continuous sounds. Remember, those sounds that we can stretch out is going to be easier for students. Use words with less phonemes. Remember that chart I showed you from Dr. Moats and how we can go up and we can use less phonemes in a word. And then we can back up. If they're still struggling to blend two phonemes, let's back up and do some larger units, some work at the larger units in service of getting to the phoneme level, always with the goal to get to the phoneme level. And we can use pictures to support and providing a choice, because like you could have those pictures and you could have two different pictures and you give them the phonemes and then they have two different ones to choose from. All right, how can you make a task more challenging? Well, we can remove those scaffolds. So all those things were scaffolds, right? the pictures, the gestures, the manipulatives. You can remove that. And you can go to the next linguistic level, like more phonemes. So I can use, we're great with CVC. I'm going to go to CCVC, words with those consonant clusters at the beginning or at the end. And then I can go up to more phonemes. So I can have consonant clusters at the beginning and the end. All those things. Okay, move to explicit and systematic phonics instruction. Now, if you had asked me years ago if I was teaching phonics, I would have been like, yes. And I would have been kind of offended that you were implying that I wasn't. But when I think back on my phonics instruction before, I was more facilitating phonics activities than actually teaching explicit and systematic phonics. I didn't even know what good phonics lesson looked like. And so I learned that we can't leave things to chance. And really, this is what I was doing. I was whatever concept that the students struggled with, like, oh, they struggled with this word in this book yesterday, so I guess I'll just teach that. But when you're doing that, it's like this Swiss cheese effect, and the students have holes in their knowledge. And so I learned that we need to follow a scope and sequence. Here's an example of a great scope and sequence. Now, there's not one perfect scope and sequence endorsed by the science of reading. Okay, there's multiple ones, and that's great. I've used several different ones and had success with a lot of them. But in general, you want to look for a scope and sequence that goes from high frequency spellings to low frequency spellings. Okay, that goes from more simple concepts to complex concepts. All right, so that was much different because now I was saying, okay, today we're going to learn a new sound, a new spelling for the sound O. To show what, oh, we're going to learn OA spells O, and now we're going to read words with OA. We're going to spell words with OA. We're going to do a sentence that has OA words, and then we're going to do a passage with words with OA. So that was a big change. I learned that explicit instruction is this I do, we do, you do format. And it's not always I do, we do, you do. It's I do, we do, we do, we do, we do, we do, you do. Oh, we do, you do. Okay, so I learned to be very flexible with that and to watch my students. And I learned that we need to elicit frequent responses. And you can guess, you can hear Dr. Anita Archer as I'm speaking. She says, learning is not a spectator sport. Everyone does everything. So sometimes when people hear the word like explicit instruction, they think, oh, that's very boring. And the teacher is up there lecturing and it's so dull. No, it is not. If you came to my classroom, you'd see that my phonics instruction is so interactive. I do something, they do something. I say something, they say something. I write something, they write something. I read something, they read something. And so, and Anita Archer talks about if there's one thing you're going to do in your classroom, one thing to make a difference, it would be to increase the amount of student responses. And as student responses go up, the behavior goes down, the learning also goes up. So what I want you to really do is think about your phonics instruction and think about how can I up the amount of time students are responding. And when you think of those ways to respond, there's these 3 different ways that Dr. Anita Archer talks about. We can respond verbally, we can respond written, and physical. And she says 3 to 5 responses per minute. And that seems like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. But you think about it, a response could just be, open up your book, finger on the first word, what word? And then, so it's just eyes, finger, saying something. All these different things can be ways to respond. So if you look at just some pictures from my classroom of a phonics lesson, students are having lots and lots of opportunities to respond. So we might be doing some choral reading all together. I might model one and then we're going to do it all together. Additionally, you can see like the little word lists. This is the way that I always kind of up the amount of practice because then I create word lists with the phonics skill that I just taught, and that's going to give them some more practice. I know when I do choral reading that some students are going to be a little bit more relying on their neighbor than doing it themselves. But when I give them the individual word list and they do it with a partner, then that responsibility is on them and they're getting the practice, right? And it only takes a couple of minutes. All right, we are getting out a passage and we're highlighting the phonics skill in that passage. That's a physical activity. They are writing. We're using our whiteboards to do our sentence or word dictation. So lots of different opportunities to respond. When you look at steps of a phonics lesson. Now, it's okay if you're, and this is on page 50, if you have 7 Mighty Moves open and you want to follow along a little bit there. It's okay if your phonics program doesn't go in this order, right? You can change the order a little bit. The important thing is that you have these important components, all right? So as you're looking at your lesson and you're thinking, okay, you hopefully have a good phonics program that provides this for you, but you want to be thinking about, in the course of your lesson, how can I increase the student responses? How can I get more practice in? I'm always thinking about who is doing the work. Because I went to watch a teacher do a phonics lesson one time, and it was like she was writing the words and the students would just copy her. She was reading the words and the students were echoing her. So they were having student responses, but I was thinking, well, who's doing the work, the teacher or the students? So yes, you want to model, but you also need to gradually release and make sure that they are doing the work too. And then again, thinking about those frequent responses. Okay, I'm going to talk about a couple of routines I use for the dictation portion of your phonics lesson. And I learned this little routine from a program called Reading Horizons, and they use this, and I like it because the teacher will say the word twice, and the students repeat the word twice. Then they segment the sounds, and then they write it. So I would say bath, bath, and students go bath, bath, b, ah, and then they get out their whiteboards and they write b, ah, and I make my students say the sounds while they're writing. I'm always really trying to trying to help them get automaticity with those letters and sounds, the correspondences. And I just really, at first I was like, why do they say it twice? That would be confusing, but it's actually just for my students, it seems like it cues them. It just kind of, they get into the routine all of a sudden. I say a word twice, they repeat it twice, they segment, and then they start writing. And so it's really nice that they have this routine. It's just like right away, okay? I like to use whiteboards for my phonics instruction. It's okay if you don't. And some people have these great papers and they might have the Elkonin boxes on them and everything. That's great. I love the whiteboards. It's so low stakes. It's so easy to correct students and have them fix something. So if they wrote this and let's say they put an E instead of an I, and I can say, look, yours says this. I want this. So easy to just swipe that with their finger and put in the correct one. It's also really easy for me to see their work. And anytime in phonics instruction, again, I'm channeling Dr. Archer here, you look around, you walk around, you talk around. And so I'm not just up at the front of the room. I am walking around and looking at their boards as they're writing and helping them right away. We're always attending to whiteboards, to handwriting too. So on those I like the whiteboards with the handwriting lines because I'm watching that and watching them how they form their letters. And then we have, this is another thing I learned from the program, Reading Horizons, we play this thing called the eraser game. So after students have written all their words, I'm going to, instead of just having them erase, we're going to play a little game, which is again going to give them another practice opportunity. So let's say we did SH and they have these words up, and I'll say, okay, well, I'll tell them lids on markers, and then I'll say, point to the word that's a part of your body. Point to the word that's a part of your body. And what do they have to do? They have to go back and read their words. So they're reading them again. They find the word, they point to it. I don't say erase it yet, so you have to point to it. And I'm looking around and I'm like, oh, great, this person has it, this person, nice job. What's the word? And everyone reads shin. Yes, a shin is part of your body. Erase the word shin, so they erase it. And then I'll do another one. Okay, point to the word that's another word for dollar bills. And I wait, they're reading through, they have to find, they point, and I say, what's the word? Everyone reads it, and then they erase. So it's just a fun way to get more practice in. Okay, so let's move on. So those were some ideas for move 2, that phonics instruction. Now we're moving on to moves 3 and 4, and I'm going to talk about these moves together. And using decodable text instead of predictable text is one of, I don't know, it's one of the biggest things I did because I was teaching kindergarten the same year that my son was diagnosed, okay? And even before he was diagnosed, this is the first little inkling I started to get a little uneasy with some of the things I hadn't taught. So in kindergarten, you automatically spend a lot of time teaching letter names and sounds. And so I was so excited to bring my students to the small group table and show them, now I'm going to show you how you can read words. But the books that I had that were provided through the big box curriculum were those predictable repetitive texts. So this is things like, we cleaned up the garage, we cleaned up the kitchen, we cleaned up the bedroom. And so these were filled with words with sound spelling correspondences that I had not taught. Okay. And so I found myself having to say, oh, wait, oh, stop. Oh, you can't sound this one out. Look at the picture. Does it give you a clue? And I was like, ew, I feel like I'm giving them the wrong idea of what reading is. And I did this all the time. For years, I said things like that when I was teaching second grade and I didn't think anything of it. But now I was teaching kindergarten and I have these brand new fragile readers right in front of me. And I'm teaching them something completely different than I was just teaching in our phonics lesson. I just taught them letter sounds and I want them to practice their letter sounds. But now they're not practicing it. They're just looking at the picture and they're memorizing the pattern. So that was my first kind of like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? So to illustrate that, you think, let's say I had taught you these 4 symbol correspondences, all right? If I had taught you this one is that triangle is we have that circle is s, and the dot is t. Then what does that say? And it's going to take you, it might take you a minute, but you could see how, okay, no, I see that says Sam sat. And it might be a little bit hard at first because this is brand new, but once you had become a little more automatic and proficient with those symbols, that would be no problem. Now, let's say if I had still just taught you those 4 symbols, and then I gave you a book, look like this. What does that say? I mean, that seems ridiculous, right? When you think about it. I saw Sam at the store, he was buying candy. And the idea is the next page would say, I saw Sam at the store, he was buying milk. I saw Sam at the store, he was buying apples. And the student would just need to look at the picture and guess the word, right? Figure out the word from there. It seems ridiculous when you think about it. We don't do this in math. We don't say, oh, we teach them single digit addition and then give them a paper filled with multiplication problems, right? We don't do that. So why do we do it with reading? And the first problem with these kind of books is they're not getting any practice with the phonics concept I just taught. And the only way for the students to read those books is to have them look at the picture, memorize the pattern, guess from context. And these books were written for the purpose of teaching the 3 cueing strategies. And so this is move 3 in my book because I had to completely abandon the 3 cueing strategies, which it can be hard to hear, especially if you're like me and did this for years. So I was really, really angry when I found out that there's no research to support 3 cueing. So this is things like, does it make sense? Does it sound right? Does it look right? That last one looks promising. But when I looked at like my textbook from college, it literally said that this one should be used as a last resort, which is completely wrong because this should be the first resort, right? Looking at the graphophonemic. So it's this idea that readers use these various cues to figure out the words. If you're not familiar with the term 3-cueing, you might be familiar with these Beanie Baby strategies, and they are based on the 3-cueing. So it's like eagle eye. Use your eagle eye, look at the picture. Does it give you a clue? Be like Skippy the Frog, jump over the word, read the rest of the sentence, and then figure out what the word is. Or be like Lips the Fish, get your mouth ready, which no one even knows what that one means, really. Um, so I know it can be hard, but these are guessing strategies, not reading strategies. And what the research does tell us that these are strategies that poor readers use, not good readers. Good readers can read words in isolation. They don't need the context or the picture to decode or figure out what that word is. And I saw this with my son because before he had the skills, this is what he would do. Guess, 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 guess. As soon as he came to a word he didn't know, he tried to guess. He looked at the picture. He read the rest of the sentence. He tried to guess what it was in. But once he had the skills he needed, and we could break the habit, because it's a very hard habit to break, then he didn't need to rely on those things. He could just decode the word. Now, I want to be very clear about something, because I'm not saying that now the context is bad or the pictures are bad. We still need the context. The context helps support the meaning of the word. The context helps us know is this word wind or wind? Is this word read or read? Okay, so it's not now anytime someone says context or refers to context, that doesn't mean, oh my gosh, that's bad. What I'm saying is we don't want them to use context to decode or figure out what the word is. They can use context to understand the meaning of the word and the meaning of the story. And the same with the pictures. I'm not saying we don't take away the pictures and never have books with pictures. Absolutely not. I love using books with beautiful, vibrant pictures. Okay, the pictures can help us understand the meaning and what's happening in the story. But we don't want students to be looking at the picture to guess or to figure out the word, if that makes sense. So what do we want? We want students to become familiar with the details of the words. And a lot of times when you're using those 3-cueing strategies, what is happening? Their eyes are going off the word and they're looking at the picture or they're reading the rest. Their eyes are off. But I know that what students need is they need to match the sounds they hear with the letters they see on the page and the meaning of the word. Those 3 things need to happen for them to store that word in their memory for this effortless retrieval in the future. Okay, so students are not going to be able to do that if they're not attending to that word and they're just guessing it. They'll look at the first letter and they guess the rest, then they're not becoming familiar with the details of the word. Additionally, those beginning reading texts, look at this, may well exert a more powerful influence in shaping children's word identification strategies than the method of reading instruction. And that's really what I saw, because even if you're teaching these phonics lessons, but then you give them a book, a predictable repetitive text, they're going to pick up these bad habits and they're not using those phonics skills. And so that's why it's helpful to use decodables at the beginning, because I really want them to learn to rely and trust the letters and their phonics knowledge. I really want them to trust the letters. I love the research article Ending the Reading Wars. If you're going to read one thing, I'd be like, oh, read this. It's long and it could be heavy, but it has so much valuable information in it. And they said that phonics teaching is more effective when children are given the immediate opportunities to apply what they have learned. And we don't want phonics in isolation over here. We want them to apply the phonics. Additionally, Dr. Pam Kastner is here with us today, and she has said that if it's been taught but not mastered, there is probably a practice gap. And I just thought, yes, and that is what our students need. They need more practice. And I'm always thinking about how many minutes of practice are they getting, and how can I up the opportunities of practice in my classroom across the day. How many minutes of practice are they getting reading? And I want to up that. So a decodable text now most of the words can be sounded out based on the phonics taught. They usually focus on one target skill. Not always. Sometimes it's a combination of several skills, and that's great. I need those too. And especially as a kindergarten teacher, you know, you need a lot of books on the CBC level because you're just building that automaticity, right? They follow a phonics scope and sequence. So that might seem silly, like you're like, of course, but when I first, that first year, that first kindergarten year, I told you that story and I was like, ew, this is the wrong idea of what teaching is. And so I went on to Teachers Pay Teachers and I downloaded something, these decodable books, and there was no scope and sequence. So it was just kind of whatever random things in there that the author thought was decodable. So I was like, oh, this doesn't work. This isn't decodable. So just because a book says it's decodable, it might not be. It depends, you know, the author or creator might not have understood what a decodable text is. And then, of course, they allow the readers to apply what you taught in those phonics lessons. The knowledge matters. So you think of decodability on a continuum. All right, because if the student hasn't been taught that concept, it's not going to be decodable for them, but it might be for someone else. And this is why you do need to think about like your phonics scope and sequence, and then the decodables scope and sequence to see how it matches up and how your students can do with that information. So let's look at this. So let's say here's and all these pictures I'm showing you are like, I love decodables. And I just want to say, if you've been turned off by Decodable in the past, because there are some terrible ones out there, I admit, look for another series. And I get so excited because I feel like the market is just being flooded with wonderful decodables, and it's really exciting. So here's one that I use, and I just want you to look and consider, what does the student need to know to read this book? And can you tell what the skill focus of this book is? So when I'm looking when I'm looking at this, I can see, well, it mostly seems like your basic alphabet sounds, right? The skill focus, do you see what it is? Short A. You can see almost every word has that short A in it. And then what high frequency word do they need to know here? What word is going to be a little more tricky? We have the word the, and that's going to be a little bit harder for them. There are going to be high frequency words in decodables. That's fine, because otherwise it's going to sound really odd if there's none. But you don't want a book that has like too many, where that's all those kind of words, right? And then you can look at see, here's another one. You can see this one's a little bit harder. So this is going to be a little bit further down on the scope and sequence. And can you tell what the skill focus is here? And if we didn't have to disable the chat, I would say put it in the chat, but I just want you to find it. And it's that CH digraph. You could see, we see. So how wonderful, because look how many practice opportunities the students are getting here. What else do they need to know? I'm looking at any other spellings that might be tricky. We have a lot of words with consonant clusters. So that's something to take into consideration. They don't have to necessarily have been taught that separately, but that for some students, they might have a little more time, challenging time blending those words. I have the high frequency word or a, that might be a little tricky. We have as and is, that may or may not be tricky for a student. I teach mine that S spells Z as well as. So that won't be hard for them, but if you haven't taught that, then that might be difficult. All right, here's another one. Can you tell what the skill focus is here? And you can see it's ing, ing. We have 3 words right on that page with the ing. Some high frequency words in here that might be a struggle. We have to and by. So those are ones that I'm probably going to want to review or before they read the book. He and me may or may not be, because it depends if you have taught your students that open syllable, right, at the end, and the vowel will be long. Here's another one. Now, again, this is an example of if this is a beginning of the if you are beginning of the year kindergarten, is this book decodable for that student? No. But if you have taught vowel consonant E, then this one is decodable for that student. They're getting lots of practice with the A consonant E. Other words that I'm looking that might be tricky, we've got said, we've got need, if they haven't been taught the two E's. And we have saw. That might be tricky if they haven't learned AW. So those are ones I might want to pull out to pre-teach. And I love using decodables in small group because that allows me time to give feedback to my students. And it's kind of like the number one thing I want to do with my students in small group is give them practice reading. I want them doing the thing. I want them reading, and I'm right there ready to help them and to give feedback and to make sure that they're reading correctly. Another one of the first things, especially as a first grade teacher, one of the first things I need to teach them is to keep their finger on the words, because like I said, some of times they come in with the habit of wanting to guess from the picture or memorize the pattern or just, and so even they'll look up at me, and if they say the word or they finish the sentence and they look up at me, I'm like, now look at the words while you say it, because I really want to instill that in them. Because remember, what do I want? I want them to become familiar with the details of the word. They need to match the sounds they hear, the letters they see with the meaning of the word, so that they can store that word in their memory. So I'm always doing little things to help to, get that habit. Okay, and this is how I like, there's multiple ways to do things in small group, and this is how I prefer to have my students reading in small group, because as I said before, I'm always thinking about how can I up the opportunities for practice? How many minutes of practice are students getting? So this is what I prefer. I prefer having everyone reading aloud at the same time at different places in the book, which sounds chaotic. I know it sounds chaotic, but it's not. It's not. So if I have 5 students in my small group table, I'll give the books to students in spots 1, 3, and 5, and they start reading aloud. They're just kind of whisper reading. And then students in spots 2 and 4, I'm going to give those little word lists that I showed you that I use in our phonics lesson. I can reuse those, and they're going to read that word list while we're waiting for the other students to flip and get to the next page. Once those students are on the next page, then I'll give the books to students in spots 2 and 4, and then they'll start reading. Okay. And then I'm listening in. I'm listening in to all my students read. And you find that you get really good at listening to this student read. And then you might hear something over here. And I'm like, oh, check that word again. And then I'm coming back over here. And so you're just kind of managing all 5 of them. And it really works. And then we can stop and we can have conversations about the book at the end. It's a never ending task. So if my students finish the book, they start again. Until I say stop and have everyone stop reading. Okay, so this is just my way of getting more practice. Here's just a little video clip so you can see it's maybe not as chaotic as it sounds. Okay, so it works. Now I had someone say, well, what if the students like have attention problems and that's really hard for them? That's, of course I've taught students with attention problems. Really interesting that I've never had anyone really that was struggling paying attention in that, like with what they were reading. But I would say that if they did, you could use those like little PVC pipe phone things that you probably have seen those or have some. So if so, I would have them use that so that they're just really focusing on what they're saying. And then the best cue to a word is the word itself. I love this quote from Dr. Seidenberg. And so we don't need all these things. I don't need all these little Beanie Baby strategies or things to take their eyes away from the words. Their eyes are on the words. And like I said before, they need to learn to trust the letters. And I really want them to trust the phonics knowledge they have. So I'm directing them to that word, and then I'm just going to help them within that word with the part that they are struggling with. So this is what I do when a student comes to a word that they don't know. First, I have the pointing prompt. I'm just going to point. And I like to use a pencil to point because I can point to the little part that I know that they're struggling with in that word. So first I just point and I wait because sometimes they'll just go ahead and self-correct themselves. If they don't, then I'm going to go to the verbal prompt. I'm going to tell them the sound. Maybe they don't remember it. Maybe they haven't been taught it. And it's usually the vowel sound, right? So you have the word house. I point to the OU and I say, these two letters spell ow. What sound? They say ow. And then I go to the blending prompt and I have them blend the sounds. If they're unable to blend the sounds, I'm going to model and help them do that. Using that, like what I showed where I would cover the end and I would do the first phonemes, have them blend those, then uncover the end and have them blend. All right. And then I'm making a note. We got to work on phonemic awareness, right? So I don't just tell them the whole word because then I'm doing the work. So I tell them the part they need and then have them blend. Again, what do they need to do to learn? They need to match the sounds they hear with the letters they see with the meaning of the word, those three things. So that's why I'm just giving them a part and I'm having them blend and do it again. They're doing the work, and I want them to do that productive struggle so that later they're able to recognize it instantly. And I promise we'll hopefully have some time for questions. So we're coming up to the end. So just be thinking of some questions. Hopefully we're going to you can either just direct message Pam. I think they can direct message you, or we'll open up the chat in a minute if we're brave. Okay, then remember, decodable texts are like training wheels. Kids need them for only a short amount of time, and the goal is to transition away from them as soon as the child is ready. So be very, very careful that we don't overcorrect. And the science of reading doesn't mean now we only use decodables. No, no, no. And I've heard of like, a fourth grade teacher saying, I need decodables for my whole class. Which ones are good for fourth grade? And I'm like, oh no, most of your students should not need decodables. Maybe a couple of them do, but most of them don't. So, and the tricky things, we want to transition away from decodables when they're ready. Okay. The tricky thing is they're not all ready at the same time. And so I can tell you my opinion. It seems like most students, a lot of students are ready to start transitioning middle of first grade. That doesn't mean that they can't still benefit from some decodables. And you might say, well, I teach second grade and we just learned a hard phonics concept and I want a decodable where they can practice that phonics skill over and over. Wonderful. They're still going to benefit from that, but you can also be scaffolding them into complex text. Right. And I love first grade because I think it's so exciting as to help students transition from decodables into regular text. It's really exciting. I think a lot of students just need the basics of the phonics code and then they're ready to start transitioning. A lot of students need to have, their vowel consonant E, of course, their digraphs, their vowel teams, their diphthongs, ow and oi, and then they're ready. And some can even be ready a little bit before that. One thing to consider with your decodables is the percentage of decodable words. And before you just write off a decodable thinking that is too hard, think more about when could I use it? Could I use it and when? And what I do is I will start my first graders. Everyone starts in a very highly decodable texts at the beginning of the year. And then I can move them into texts that are a little bit more challenging, that are still considered decodable, but are less decodable, have that a little lower percentage. And that just prepares them for then regular texts. So you can see the pictures here, both of these examples, very highly decodable. And then if you look at this one is a little bit trickier. Look at the words there. We have Nana, we have said, we have you, we have the word whip, That WH might be new. We have beans, we have for, we have you, we have love. So we have some harder words here. So the beginning of the year, first grade, a lot of my students couldn't read this. And if I put them in this too soon, they might start guessing. But after a couple months, I can transition a lot of students into this text and they're fine with it. And so what I'm doing is I'm watching my students especially when I'm starting the transition. So when they've been in very highly decodable texts, I need to do some text with a lower decodability. I move them into those and I'm listening and I'm watching. If they start guessing a lot, then they're not ready and I put them back into a more highly decodable. But if they're doing okay, we have some more practice with that, and then I can move them into regular text. And I just think it's really exciting being able to transition students. These are a couple series that I think are great for helping students to scaffold and transition into regular texts. Okay, and then just know that when I am doing my small group, I have different groups, different purposes. So if I am teaching kindergarten, I use any grade, I'm going to use my screening data. I use Acadians. I'm going to use that initially to make my groups. And then I'm going to kind of be watching and use informal assessments to kind of switch people around. But I'll have some groups where the focus of that group is like their alphabet knowledge. So if I have students that don't know all their alphabet, that is the focus of the group. And we're spending time learning letter sounds. And then so that we're spending time using those letter and sounds, and then they might be in a decodable in that group, but that's a very controlled, highly decodable book that like maybe just has MASPT sounds, right? And I'm just more careful with that. We're going to have several groups that are decoding skills. These are right in those decodable texts. Then we have groups that are, doing great with their fluency, and they are working. My focus with them is their fluency. And so we might be focusing on, and they might be transitioning to harder decodables or into regular texts. And then I have some groups where the focus is building vocabulary and content knowledge. That's the focus of that group. All right, so I have these different groups. I saw a question about leveled text. Well, to me, a leveled text, any text can be leveled. So no, we don't want to get rid of all our regular text. Like I said, you need to scaffold students into them. Now, those predictable repetitive texts, I really don't find use for those because my students are just going to pick up bad habits. But we have some beautiful other books, like my first graders love the book Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type. That is a regular text. And yes, my students can read that text. I'm not only going to expose them to decodables. Of course, from the beginning, we're reading to them, but then especially I think in first grade, it starts where we transition students into them. And it depends on kind of the scaffolding and as you do that. So you want to scaffold students into that. We read Frog and Toad. That's a beautiful book. I'm not going to get rid of those beautiful books. You're going to scaffold students into them. So I will look. I'll just point, if I don't get to all your questions, you feel free to reach out to me on social media, or I should have put on here, I have a website, lindsaykemeny.com. And so I have a contact form there too. So you're welcome to reach out there. And I also am the co-host of the Literacy Talks podcast. So if you want, if you're super literacy nerd like me, you can join there too. So I'm going to look at some of these other questions.
There's a question from about backward decoding. I saw Lindsay, and then one about word lists a little bit further down.
So I haven't used a lot of backward decoding myself. I've heard it talked about. I haven't used it, but I've heard that I think the place to use it, if you have a student that has a really bad habit of guessing, I think then you might want to use that where you can't get them. They're looking at the first word, the first letter, and they're guessing. I think then that could be helpful to show, and if you're to show the end of the word, and then they blend that, and then you add a little bit more. So I think if they have a guessing habit, but it's just not one that I particularly have used a lot. And then, okay, we have level text. So I talked about that.
The word list about would you add nonsense words or not? And then there's a question about the song, the blending and segmenting song. So
Okay. So the phonics, she's asking if I use nonsense words in those lists that I make. I don't. I just have students read actual words. I guess the exception to that would be I have a blending board. If you saw that in my book, and sometimes we have 3 different cards, and the students are practicing blending the word, and then like I change one letter, and sometimes it just so happens that a nonsense word comes up. And so then we would read a nonsense word, and I have my students do a thumbs up if it's a nonsense word, thumbs down if it's not, so that we can kind of, you know, support that. But generally, no, I don't put nonsense words in. I like to use nonsense words for assessment. And especially that's really good to see if the students are memorizing words, because and that's really a way to find some students who fly under the radar. If you are giving an assessment to your students and they seem like they do okay with the regular passage, and then they bomb the nonsense words, there's a good chance that student is struggling, is memorizing. They might be memorizing words as a whole, which is just not the most efficient way to store that word in memory, or that they're really good at guessing from context. And so that just clues you in, oh, we've got to work on their blending for that student. And then and I talk a little bit more about that in part 2. And I also think that is really common for some students. I have a friend who he has dyslexia, and he said, that's what I did. I memorized words. It's very common for students with dyslexia to have a deficiency in phonemic awareness. And so what he was doing is he wants to bypass the whole phonemic awareness step. He doesn't want to segment the sounds and connect them with the letters. He just looks at the word as a whole and just wants to memorize it because that's easier for them, right? So I prefer to use nonsense words to assess. The woman that I got the songs. So she's asking, where did you learn those songs? She's not active anymore, but she has a YouTube channel called Kindergarten Readers, and her name is Elise. And I'm just like, I didn't make up the songs, so I always try to like share where I learned things, and I learned those songs from her, and I love them. So that's that. So I don't see any more questions. I don't see any more questions. I think we're right at 1:30.
yes. Okay, all right. There's a couple things for me to take care of, so I'll do that real quickly. One thing I'm going to do for, and maybe I'll be able to add this as well to our handouts, if it's okay with you, Lindsay, is the Reading League Pennsylvania, also with the Reading League New York and the Reading League North Carolina, did a series of book studies and took a deep dive into each of the Mighty Moves over 8 months. And Lindsay joined us for some of those. And we recorded all those sessions, and they're on a Padlet, or a Wakelet. So I'm putting that in the chat. I'll put it in there a couple of times. And if it's okay, I'll add that to your handouts because it's just another resource to continue your learning. Of course, the book is absolutely amazing. We are going to take a short 15-minute break. We want to thank Lindsay for part 1. We know she's an incredible teacher for her students and also for teachers. She's always so grounded in the science and in the evidence. But boy, she's a translator, isn't she? So we're so fortunate to have her with us. And I was noticing over the course of this first part, we went from 190, 98 to 200 and here in the first part 1. You know how amazing part 2 is going to be, right? But I'll go through the spiel that we are supposed to for each session. My name is Dr. Pam Kastner. I have the honor of serving as Patent State Lead for Literacy, and joining me is Jeff Kabasa. Did I get that right, Jeff?
Kabasa.
Kabasa.
Yeah.
So I was so excited to have him here as a co-facilitator. And my colleague, Sherry Hartman, is going to stick around too, because she doesn't want to miss another minute of Lindsay Kemeny too. So we're excited to facilitate this session for everyone. Before we start, we have a few housekeeping items to review. All symposium announcements, presenter bios, and handouts are posted on the symposium webpage, the patent events. And I think that our technology challenges are reducing or maybe even gone at this point. So that's awesome. Just as a reminder, this session is being recorded. I'll put the recording back on here in just a moment. This part two is 75 minutes. We are going to let the chat stay open, so you'll be able to ask questions. That's what Lindsay had said she'd like to do at interim, so she'll let you know all about that. And she also has some time last time for questions at the end. To access closed captioning, click on the icon CC Live Transcript on the Zoom control panel. And of course, if you're a social media person like Lindsay and myself, you can certainly tweet out on social media about this great session and the Patent Literacy Symposium at PatentLit24. So that's hashtag PATTANLIT24. And now I'm just going to turn it right over to Lindsay.
Thank you. And thank you, those that are returning from part one that were joining me earlier today. And if you weren't there, welcome. I'm Lindsay Kemeny. I'm the author of the book 7 Mighty Moves. And I'm also a current teacher, and I'm teaching first grade. I don't have any plans to leave the classroom. I love teaching. And I love speaking, and I love helping teachers. I just love helping students more. And I also just think it's helpful. I like to be, I mean, just anytime I learn about something, I like to try it in my classroom. And I think it's just helpful when I'm trying to like share and help others that I've like done the things. And so anyway, that's just a little bit about me. And I I just like to start. My son keeps me grounded. He is why I'm doing this, why I'm here. And his journey just kind of reminds me of my why. And if you've heard me speak, you've heard me talk about him before, but he was diagnosed with dyslexia in second grade, and it just kind of changed me. He was diagnosed with depression as well. And so he just really changed my outlook on teaching reading, and I've just come to see firsthand how important it is and what a great gift we have as educators to be able to help instill the gift of literacy in our students. Truly, I just think it's the greatest gift we can give them because it opens up the windows of opportunity for these students. When they read, they have just more opportunity. And so it's just vital. And I shared that, it's with my son. He started me on this learning journey, and I had to do things with him. And as I was applying things with him, I was applying things in my classroom. And I found that I could really group the changes I was making into 7 categories. And those are the 7 moves. So the 7 mighty moves of my book. So in part 1, I talked about moves 1 through 4. And in part 2, I'm going to be talking about moves 5 through 7. There's so much more that could be said about each move. And I do, and I could give presentations on each one individually. Additionally, Pam was talking about in the earlier session that there was the Reading League New York, the Reading League Pennsylvania. They had there was one more Reading League, Pam. What was that did that book study?
North Carolina. North Carolina.
North Carolina. All together, they over 8 months, I think. And so she will link that as well, because there's like a Wakelet with resources for each move and those recordings if you want to learn more about that. So we're going to dive right in, starting with move 5, which is has to do with those high frequency words, or what we call quote unquote sight words. And what I thought before, which is pretty common, and you might have thought this too, is I thought that a sight word was a word that couldn't be sounded out. And what I would do is basically have students memorize these as a whole. But if you look at, and I can't remember if this is like the Fry list or the Dolch, but if you look at some of these words, look how many are completely decodable just by the alphabet letter sounds. So we have in, we have not, we have if, we have it. These are completely decodable. So why do we teach them in a completely different way, or why do we think students need to memorize these as a whole when they can be decoded? Also, look how many would be decodable once you just learn that phonics skill. So you have the word this. Once the students have learned that TH, then that word is completely decodable. We have others that just are maybe just have one part that is irregular. Like you have the word said, where the S is very regular, the D is very regular, the AI is the part the student is going to struggle with, and that is irregular. So you can see we could cut down on this list if we were to align it with a phonics scope and sequence. You wouldn't have to teach so many of these because they're not that irregular. Linnea Airy said that words are not read by their shape, contextual guessing, or whole word memorization. Now, they could be. Students can memorize words, but it's not the most efficient way because there is a cap to how many words students can memorize as a whole. There's going to be a cap, and they're going to hit that cap. And so the kindergarten teacher, the first grade teacher might not realize there's a problem that they're just memorizing words as a whole, because they still might sound like great readers because they're just reading. But it's going to be the other grade teachers that they're going to hit that cap and not be able to learn and memorize any more words. And then that teacher is going to realize, oh, this child can't read. And I shared in the last session where I have a good friend, he has dyslexia, and he shares his process of learning to read and was like, I memorized words. That's what I did. I memorized words. And he didn't even realize that those letters represent sounds. Which to some of us, that seems like incredulous, but he's not alone. There's a lot of people that need that instruction. They need us to break down the code and show them how those letters represent different sounds. And I find that this is really common with those that have a weakness in phonological processing, that phonemic awareness. They have a weakness in attending and listening and being aware of the sounds in words. So when they memorize words as a whole, it's like they want to bypass that step. They just want to bypass matching the word house with the letters House. They just want to memorize as a whole. And you can really see that. It really comes out when you look at their spelling, especially if it's like a pretty simple word, like you have the spelling went, but it's spelled like this. I mean, that shows you that student isn't attending to the sounds, that possibly they're just memorizing this random string of letters. And this also, you will also see this when you assess their nonsense words. So they might read a passage okay and do decent on the passage, and then they completely bomb a nonsense word assessment. And that's showing you, oh, they might be just memorizing and guessing from context. And wow, there's students that are really good at that. And they're really hiding their deficiency in phonemic awareness. And so it's really important to catch those students early on, so we can make sure that they are attending to the sounds and the spelling. What they need is to match the sounds they hear with the letters they see with the meaning of the word. If you were here in part one, you've heard me say that a lot of times. That process is called orthographic mapping. And we need them to orthographically map these words in order to have that information in their long-term memory so they can retrieve that for effortless retrieval, right? Effortless automaticity. So I think this study is really interesting because they found that beginning readers who focus on those letter sound relationships instead of memorizing whole words increase activity in the area of the brain best wired for reading. That's what I want. I want my students to increase activity in the area of the brain best wired for reading. That's what I want. So so I don't want them just to memorize as a whole. Again, this is kind of showing you that orthographic mapping, all right? A sight word is any word that can be recognized automatically. And that is because of these three things. The spelling, those letters have been matched with the pronunciation, right? The sounds that they hear and the meaning of the word. So those three things have to happen in order for that person to orthographically map the word. I love this quote by Jan Wazowicz. Every word wants to be a sight word when it grows up. It doesn't matter if it's irregular or not. And we want all words to be recognized automatically, not because they've memorized it as a whole, but because those three things have happened. They've matched the sounds with the letters, with the meaning of the word. And so the researchers use the term sight word much differently than a lot of the practitioners because they use it to refer to these words that they know automatically, any word, because it's been orthographically mapped. So I try not to use that word sight word quite like that anymore. And you'll hear me say irregular word, a high frequency word, um, and I'll talk about regular, temporarily irregular in a minute. Some people call them other things. Tricky words, heart words, snap words, sticky words. It doesn't matter what you call it. We're talking about the same thing here. And so when you think about those words, we can group those words into words that are regularly spelled, words that are temporarily irregular spelled, like you have the word play here. The A-Y-A, that's very regular, but not to someone who hasn't learned that yet. And then we have words that are permanently irregular, right? It's always a little unusual spelling. But here's the thing. You, as the teacher, you get to decide if a word is irregular for a student or not. And so it depends on what you've taught them and what the student knows. And so sometimes I see people kind of get into it online, or they say, why'd you put a heart above there? That's completely regular. Well, it's not to their student. And so you can decide if it's irregular or not for your student. If you teach kindergarten, and you have the word three, and you're not going to teach the EE vowel team at all, then that's irregular for your students the whole year. And versus a first grade teacher who maybe that's irregular at the beginning of the year, and then once they learn EE, it's completely regular. Okay, so it exists on a continuum. So, and it's really sad to me, just the pressures that I think a lot of teachers are under, because some districts you have to learn all these words. You have to learn these 200 by the end of kindergarten. And then in first grade, you have to learn this 100 and then this 100 and then this 100. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it frustrates me because I think we might prioritize spelling these, memorizing these words instead of the phonics. And I like to wait to introduce irregular words. Like when I'm a kindergarten teacher, I want to spend a lot of time on those letter sound correspondences before I start introducing irregular words. And so it's really frustrating when your district has these pressures or kind of these set things in place. And so my first advice would be to look at your phonics scope and sequence and look at the words that you're required to teach and see which ones could align with your phonics scope and sequence. And so you wouldn't have to teach them separately, because you're like, oh, I'll teach this word when I teach, I'll teach like when I teach vowel consonant E. That's going to be easy. But sometimes you need a word before it's going to come up in your phonics scope and sequence, because it is going to appear in the texts that you're using. Because even if you're using decodable text, and we talked about decodable text this morning, even those are going to have, they all are going to have some irregular words in it that you're going to need to teach. So then you could teach that word as an irregular word, and I'm going to share my routine in a minute. And you can tell the students, so this word is a little tricky right now because we haven't learned it yet. Oh, you'll learn this. We haven't learned this yet. So right now this word is a sticky word or whatever you call it, okay? So what I used to do is I used to have these word lists, and I would just basically send them home. And so students could, as soon as they pass off a list, they could get the next list. And then when they passed off that, they could get the next one and the next one. And so the problem is, like, I haven't taught necessarily those words, and they're just going home. And what are they doing? They're just memorizing the word. And it really, there's problems with that. And then I just remember I had this student, and because again, at this time, I'm like, these are words, you can't sound these out. And then I had this little student, and when he would practice these, he would go, to, do, and he was like sounding them out, even if it was like not the regular spelling. And I remember being like, what is he doing? You can't sound these words out, and he's sounding them out. And then, like, if he had like all, he would go all, and he switched it. And I was like, what is he doing? And I'm like, what he was doing was wonderful. He had mapped the sounds of the spelling, even when it was irregular. And just at the time, I was like, what? I don't understand what he's doing. And now I'm like, oh, that was awesome, because he had mapped even the irregular sound. And so what we want students to become familiar with the details of the word. I mentioned that in part one. And didn't this little student, wasn't he familiar with the details of the words? He was. And so now when I teach high frequency words, I'm thinking about this, like, and I'm thinking of what we know about orthographically mapping, and that we can match the sounds of the letters and the meaning. And so I teach these words very differently now. Um, okay, so I want them to look carefully at that word and decode it from left to right. They might sound it out like at first, and then they're going to get automatic with it, and they won't need to sound it out, and they'll just say it. So they'll say it automatically, but it's not because they've memorized it, but because they've mapped the sounds with the letters, with the meaning. So I learned this routine from Nora Chabazi, if you know who she is, and I'm really grateful for learning it. And so I'm going to share this with you, and it's basically just a way for students to become familiar with the details and to point out the irregularities of the word. So here is that routine. And so the first thing I'm going to do is say the word, and I'm going to use it in a sentence. So let's pretend like I'm going to do the word people, and I'll say, okay, our heart word, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter if you call it heart word or not. Our heart word today is the word people. Like, there are a lot of people in our class. And then I'll say, tell me the sounds in people. And the students will go, p, e, p, o. And then I'm going to get on the whiteboard, and I'm going to have my dry erase marker, and I'm going to do a sound. I call them sound lines. P, E, P, O. And the students are going to do it too. I'll say say the sounds while you do your sound lines, and they'll go, and they'll say it again. So they're segmenting. P, E, P, O. Okay. Again, I'm wanting to match those sounds with the letters. We're not going to bypass the step of segmenting, because you'll have students that want to bypass that step and just say, I already know how to spell people. And I'm like, I want you to say the sounds and do the sound line. So we do the sound lines. The next step is 3. We're going to map those phonemes to the graphemes. So I'm going to show them it. Now, there's a couple different ways I could do this. I can just well, I'll explain this first way first. I can just say, what's the first sound? That's right. Say as you write, p, and I write the P on the first line. What's the next sound? E. Yes. Okay. Watch my spelling for E. And I put the E-O, and everyone's like, what? And then what's the next sound? P. That's right. Say as you write, P. What's the next sound? O. Look carefully at this one, and I write the L-E on those lines, okay? And so that is that step number 3. Now, a little bit different way, and the students are writing and saying that. Something a little different than that way is I could just show them the word after we've segmented it and said p, e, p, o, and done those sound lines, I could now have the word on like on a card and I show it to them and then say, what's the p spelling? And they write it. And then I say, look at this, look at the word. How many letters do you think spell the E sound? And they can show me on their fingers. Okay. So they might say, yeah. And then they might be like, well, the E, but not, and some will be like the two. And I'm like, it's two. It's the E and O. And then they're looking at that word. What's the P? Okay. And we write it. What's the O? They're looking at it. So that's a little different. Showing the word, still very valuable because what are they doing? They're analyzing that word. They're analyzing it and figuring it out, which is great practice too. So you could do that either of those ways. Okay. Now, number 4, let's point out the irregular parts. So I could say to my students, which part is tricky? And they're going to say, of course, the EO, right? The EO is tricky and we're going to circle that. So we circle it and then we put 2 lines under that, those letters because 2 letters spell that sound. So that's just a little like something a little different than you might have seen that I learned from Nora. And I like that. It's just a little scaffold and it's really making them think about how many letters are spelling that sound. So they'll put 2 lines. Anything else tricky? Oh, the ol is LE. Okay, let's circle it and put 2 lines under it to help us remember. Now, you might be saying, well, that's not irregular. That's just consonant LE. Yes. And and maybe if you haven't taught that, it's irregular. Let's say you have taught that. So you're like, no, they know that consonant LE. However, that still might be challenging. It still might be tricky because it could be EL, it could be AL, but it's LE. So anytime if the student thinks a part is tricky, I'm like, circle it and then put 2 lines under that because 2 letters spell that sound because it's just a way for them to clue in to the tricky part for them. And so I'll have, it's the same like when I have a word with TH, and some students are like, I totally know the TH. I don't need to circle that. Okay, great. And some students are like, oh, I have a hard time remembering that. Okay, circle it. So it's just a little way just to help them remember. Okay, and so then we have that and it's all written. And now we've done that with our whiteboards. So now I'll say, okay, erase the letters, but leave the lines and circles. So they usually use their finger on the dry erase boards and they just erase the spelling. And if I have the letter, the word shown, I'm going to cover it and then they're going to write it from memory. But the lines and circles are there as a scaffold. So then they're going to write it from memory. Okay, so that's like the cover the word. So you'd cover the word if you were just doing this on paper and pencil. And then they're going to write it again. And then I have students erase the whole thing. Well, first we'll check it. I'll show them right spelling and they'll check and make sure that they got it right. Then I'll erase the whole thing and then they're going to rewrite it again with no lines and circles. So none of those sound lines. And then the last step is I'm going to have students generate a sentence with that word. That's to bring it back to the meaning because we can't forget that meaning. Now, some of the irregular words are going to be difficult because their content, they're function words, like the word of, the word the, but still using it in the sentence is going to help them with how you use that word. Okay, so here's a video clip of me teaching a word in the classroom.
Okay, our heart word today is laugh. Like, I love to laugh when my friend tells a joke. Tell me the sounds in laugh.
Oh, ah.
Good, watch me as I do my sound lines. Oh, ah. Your turn, say the sounds while you write.
Oh, ah.
Good. What's the first sound?
Oh.
Oh. Say as you write, oh, please. What's the next sound?
Ah. Wait. What?
Write those 2 letters for our app.
Circle it.
Yeah, some of you are already a little surprised, right? And what's the last sound in laugh? Look at this spelling.
I knew it.
Write those letters while you spell. Okay, Which of those spellings are unusual and a little bit tricky? What do you think, Shay?
AU.
The AU, definitely. Well, you guys circle that AU and put 2 lines under it because 2 letters spell that sound. That is a very unusual spelling for a. And there's something else that's a little bit tricky for us, isn't there? What do you think, Dean?
GH.
The GH.
I knew it.
There are a handful of words where GH spells the sound. We haven't learned that. That's tricky. Let's put 2 lines. Circle that GH and put 2 lines under them. Good. All right, take a look at that. Let's see. Are you going to be able to remember those tricky spellings? This is a hard one. Okay, ready? Erase those letters. Leave the lines and circles. Thank you. Oh, you're doing it so quickly and quietly. Thank you very much. Get it all erased. Good. All right, now say as you write the word laugh. Go ahead, put it back in. Do you remember? Very nice. Make sure your H is nice and tall so it doesn't look like an N, please. Look at that. Oh, wow. Very good. Okay, did you get your L?
Yes.
Did you get your A?
Yes.
Did you get your GH?
Yes.
Very good. And what's the word?
Laugh.
Laugh. Can you think of a sentence with the word laugh and tell it to your neighbor?
Okay, it's always hard to like watch myself because I'm like, oh my gosh. I just pick it apart and I'm like, what kind of grammar am I using? Anyway, so literally some students, I do that once and they're going to remember that, but a lot of others are not. They're going to need a lot more practice. And so we're going to need to review. So once I've taught that word, then I absolutely could put that word on a card and I can review those with them. And when we have those words on a card, we can review the spellings, like, so again, trying to attach the sounds and the spellings. So I could have the word laugh and we could analyze it. I could say, what 2 letters spell ah in this word? Yeah, the AU. Yeah, what does the GH spell in this word? Yes. What's the word? Laugh. So I could just do a quick little, just to remind them, and again, attaching like the sound and the spelling, right? So we're going to review. In small group, I could do that whole routine again with students that need it again. And then always, like in my phonics lesson, we're going to come back and we're going to practice spelling the words. And if I say, okay, like, let's spell the word friend, because we learned that, and I go around and I have the majority of my students, a lot of them spell it wrong, then I can do that routine again and we're going to talk about it. Okay. You can also, of course, you can bring in, this is great if your students are ready for it, you can bring in morphology. Like the word said, I can show them, hey, look, pay goes to paid, P-A-I-D. Lay goes to laid, L-I-E-I-D. Did I say, I think I said that wrong before. P-A-I-D, laid, L-A-I-D. And then I could look, say goes to said, but said is spelled the same way, and show them how that relates. The word one, tell them the reason why it's spelled O-N-E, right? That's connected with the word lone, lonely, alone. So you can bring that in if your students are ready for it. If you feel like this would go over their head and this is a kindergartner and right now that would just be too much information, then you need to like use your best judgment for when it's best to bring that in for your students. And also we will do little tricks like with the word friend. My students will go fry and that helps them remember how to spell fry and they just think it's so fun. So I'm like, okay, let's review the word many, and they're like, Manny, you know, and they just remember that, and it's fun for them. So that is just how I like to teach the high frequency words, and just a reminder that it's not just one and done, and some students will need more review. Okay. Well, let me, before I go on to move 6, do you have any questions on move 5 before I move on? And you can just put them in the chat. Okay, well, I'll watch the chat, and if you have any questions, feel free to put it in. And let's go on to move 6, which is meaningful fluency practice. Now, originally, I just kind of thought that this fluency is going to develop on its own. And if you give students a lot of time just to read silently, that their fluency will naturally develop. But for students that have a problem with fluency, then it's not going to get better if they're left to read silently. The problem just becomes inaudible. So I found that students need lots and lots of practice reading aloud with the opportunity for feedback with fluency. Okay, I'm going to pause because I just had a question come in on move 5. Do you use the circles to mark the tricky parts of the word after you introduce it, like for example in dictation practice? If they need it, I would have them circle it again. Yeah. And so if I say let's circle that part. Oh, remember friend, the S spelling is a IE. Can you circle that IE and put 2 lines under it? Yes, let's remember that. Okay, let's erase it. Let's write it again. Yeah, you can do that if the student needs it. Or you can just, if most of them have it, you don't need to. It's just a scaffold. So you can decide when to remove that scaffold and when they need it. Okay, good question. Okay, so I love this quote. The growth of reading fluency is an outcome. It's an outcome of many different kinds of instruction and practice. It's the natural result of explicit, systematic, and comprehensive instruction coupled with, and this is my favorite part, large amounts of carefully orchestrated reading practice. And I'm always thinking about that in my classroom. How can I carefully orchestrate reading practice in my classroom? I love the choice of words there. We know that these are the cornerstones of fluency. Fluent readers read with good accuracy, rate, and prosody. Accuracy, first, foremost, and forever, the foundation of fluency, as Dr. Jan Hasbrook says. So I want you to think about that as I share like an analogy of someone learning to play the piano. And this is my second son, and just listen and think about accuracy first when it comes to fluency as you listen to him learning a brand new piece. Okay, it's slow. It's careful. He has to make sure he's accurate. He's looking at the notes and carefully looking at his hands and making sure he's getting them accurate. I can't just tell him, go faster, right? I can't skip this important step. Same with our students. We can't skip the important step of careful decoding. And then once he's got that accuracy, then we can add in the rate and the prosody. So now think about that while he's playing the next day, once he's got that accuracy better. And he would argue, Mom, that was in October and I wasn't even playing it that good. So you should have me play again and record it. I was like, oh no, it's fine. It gets the point across. But so it's accuracy first. We can't skip that step. And it's kind of like I feel like what we kind of try to do when we're using those predictable repetitive texts with beginning readers, right? We kind of wanted to skip that step of them sounding out and just have them sound like a proficient reader already. They need that necessary struggle. They do. And let me tell you, as a previous kindergarten teacher, it's a lot easier to listen to a student read a predictable repetitive text where they've just memorized the pattern and they're guessing from the pictures and they sound fluent already than listening to them slowly sound out the word Sam. And on the next page, they slowly sound out the same word again. And on the next page and on the next page, you have to be so patient. But it is exactly what needs to happen at first. So we are working on that accuracy at first, and we can't skip that step. I love Hasbrook and Glazer's definition of fluency. Okay, so we have those cornerstones, we call them, the accuracy, the rate, the prosody, and they add some important words in. Reasonably accurate, at an appropriate rate, with suitable expression. And that leads to accurate and deep comprehension. That's our goal, right? And motivation to read. I love that. And Dr. Jan Hasbrook came to my school district last year, and we got to listen to her. And these are some of the things that she shared. Reasonably accurate, right? We want them. We know that sometimes. Well, I'll just share hers. She said for independent reading, we want to aim for 95 to 98% accuracy. But emergent readers, she said, is even higher, 97 to 98% accuracy. But for instruction, we want to aim for 100% accuracy, right? And because we're right there with the student. So we're not just going to let them miss words and not worry about it. We are expecting that 100%, and we're giving feedback and helping them through those words they missed. And I like reasonably accurate because, and this kind of combines with appropriate rate, because we know, if we're just on the beach and we're relaxing, reading a beach read, an easy read, if we skim a couple parts, if we, it's not as, and we read a little bit faster, not a big deal. I was recently on an airplane, I was sitting right next to someone, and he had this pamphlet that said emergency procedures for this certain airplane. And at first I was a little panicked. And then I was talking to him. He's a pilot, and he was being trained on a brand new, new for him, a new type of airplane. I want him to read that with 100% accuracy, and I want him to slow down, and I want him to read it slower, right? And we're the same. We're reading something fun. We're reading faster. When we're reading a research article that's a little bit difficult, we slow down, and that's appropriate. So I like that they use that word appropriate rate. And we don't want speed readers, but they need to read with this automaticity and quick enough that they don't have to listen and think about decoding, but that they can just attend to the meaning behind the words and the comprehension and what's happening. And then we have this, the suitable expression prosody. Prosody includes that phrasing, the intonation, the stress, and the expression. Okay, so 3 cornerstones. And then additionally, we have this term called automaticity. And automaticity is a combination of accuracy and rate. So we are working on that automaticity from the time students are very young. So you might be thinking, I'm a kindergarten teacher, I don't worry about fluency, but you are the foundation of fluency right there, because you are working on accuracy and rate at the letter level to start, then at the word level, right? Then at the sentence level. And Dr. Hasbrook said, automaticity is the heart and soul of fluency. And I really like that. Additionally, have you thought about the fact that fluency develops in these progressions? So accuracy and then automaticity, right? That's when we combine the rate. Accuracy first, then automaticity at the letter level, letter pattern level, the word level. Then you add in those semantic and syntactic processes at the word level, phrase level, sentence level, which of course bridges into our paragraph, right, level, passage level. Okay, so yes, fluency starts at the letter and word level. And when I do a whole presentation on fluency, we can think about ideas that we can do at each of these levels. But today, of course, I've got another move after this one, so we can't spend too much time. So some things we can do in the whole group to help with the fluency. Well, choral reading, you can have everyone reading aloud. And my favorite is partner reading. Because I know with choral reading, some students are going to be relying on their neighbors, right? But partner reading is a great way, and you want to make intentional partnerships. Don't just let them choose a partner. And of course, don't partner your most fluent reader with your least fluent reader, because they're both going to be having a hard time and stressed with that. But creating these intentional partnerships and having them read with a partner so they get practice and they can have feedback right there. There's lots of different ways to do partner reading. You can have them, if they're really young, you could have them switch off every word. You could switch off every sentence. You could have them take turns on pages. You can have them, what I do a lot is I have them intentional partnerships. They don't know who the stronger reader is, but I do, and I've assigned a name for the stronger reader and weaker reader. Like, if you've heard me talk before, I do milk and cookies. And so a lot of times the milk is my stronger reader. They don't know that. The milk will read the paragraph first, and then the cookies will read the same paragraph. And then the milk will read the next paragraph, and then the cookies will read the same paragraph. So the cookies, the weaker readers, is having a model for them first, which is like a scaffold for them, okay? Another way to do partner reading is called me-we reading, which I learned about from Dr. Anita Archer. And I'll just show this little video clip that I made that I use to teach my students me-we reading.
I'm going to talk about another way that we can read with our partners called me-we reading. The first thing you need to do is make sure you and your partner sit right next to each other so you can hear each other and so you can help each other. So sit shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow. We will take turns with our partner when we do me-we reading. You will read an entire paragraph or page when it's your turn. Your partner and you will take turns, and when it's your turn to read, you can choose if you want to do me, which means you read by yourself, or we, which means you read together. So you'll tell your partner, I choose me, or I choose we. And then when it's your partner's turn, they get to choose either me or we. When it's your partner's turn to read, make sure you listen very carefully so that you can help them and be a good coach. You also need to listen carefully so that if your partner says we, you are ready to read with them. Let's watch two students as they do me-we reading.
I'm gonna do me. Bears are animals called mammals. Mammals have hair or fur on their bodies. I choose we. Mammal mothers make milk inside their bodies.
And that is how you do me-we reading. Are you ready to try?
Okay, so that's another way you can do partner reading. This is also a way you can do your whole group reading. If you're just like, it just works best for me if we take turns reading aloud in class. Well, some students are going to be really stressed out by that. So if you just do it doesn't require any prep, and it's just a little thing you can do is say, it's me-we reading, so that when it's their turn, they can choose me or they can choose we. And if they choose we, then everyone reads together. That takes the pressure off that student. And that my default always kind of goes to that, the student, the struggling student. But I really like it for partner reading, because a whole group reading, you've heard me talk about in part one, like, how can I up the minutes of practice? If we're reading one at a time in the whole group, then people are not getting a lot of practice. If you can turn that into partner reading, they're getting a lot more practice, and you are walking around and monitoring. Now, another way to do partner reading, my favorite thing, is partner reading paragraph shrinking. And I have talked about this a lot. And so my patent presentation 2 years ago, if you want to look that up, that's an amazing class-wide intervention I learned about from Dr. Matt Burns. And you can also look up his presentation for patent. So if you just search in YouTube, Matt Burns, patent, partner reading paragraph shrinking, or class-wide interventions, that's going to come up, and that is amazing. And okay, great. Pam is going to put those in the chat so you can link those. But just to show you, the first year I did this, it's evidence-based, it's been researched for grades 2 through 8. And what happened was, the beginning of the year, my class median this is when I was teaching second grade, was 50 words correct per minute. And the median just means the middle score. If I took all my students' scores, put them in order, and took the score in the middle, it was 50. And the benchmark is 52. So we had over half the class below the benchmark. I did this partner reading paragraph shrinking. Originally, I just did it for 2 weeks because you only need to do it for 2 weeks for 20 minutes a day. But we had such great results. I continue to do it throughout the year. Not always every day, sometimes a couple times a week. And then sometimes I would go and do it every day. And then by the middle of the year, the benchmark in second grade was 72 words correct per minute. Our class median was 90 words correct per minute. By the end of the year, the benchmark's 87. Ours was 118. So over half of my class was well above. And what I love about this is it's just an opportunity for practice. It is the definition, in my opinion, of that carefully orchestrated reading practice. It's exactly what it is. It's carefully orchestrated reading practice. There's this whole routine. And if you go watch either my presentation or Dr. Burns' presentation, you'll get everything you need to do that. So I'd highly recommend that. And let's go on to oh, and I had the whole procedure here, but like I said, I'm not going to go into it because I have a whole presentation on that, and I really want to allow time for move 7. And move 7 is just an area that I really neglected before. I didn't consider how important vocabulary and background knowledge is to improve comprehension. But researchers have known for years how important it is when you think about comprehension. And I really saw this firsthand when I was working with my son, because at the time, my son was obsessed with black holes. Okay, he had read books, he had watched videos on black holes. We even signed him up for a class on black holes. I mean, that's how obsessed he was. And so when I was working with him, he said, I want to read a book on black holes. And I'm like, okay. So I got one from the library. He was reading it out loud to me, and I had to keep stopping him and saying, wait, go back. Wait, let me read that again. I was struggling to understand that text. It was filled with words I wasn't familiar with. Event horizon, quasars. I did not have any of the content knowledge I needed to understand it. But he, on the other hand, understood that book perfectly. He knew those vocabulary terms. He had the background knowledge necessary. So even though I can decode better than he can, he was having better comprehension than me. So it just really drilled that point into me. So we can't just activate our background knowledge. We need to build it. And one of those ways we can build it is by that wide reading, having students, helping them through the complex texts. And then when we have them write about what they're reading, they're going to deepen their knowledge. You just think about when you have to write something, you really got to understand it in order to write about it. So it just really forces students to think about what they're reading and do. And so let's talk about some ways we can do that, what we can do with the text as we're reading to help support this comprehension. And one thing is a little bit related to what I was just talking about, because there's this routine in that partner reading paragraph shrinking called paragraph shrinking. You can do paragraph shrinking anytime. And what you do is you have the students stop at the end of a paragraph and say these 3 things here. You could also just do it at the end of a passage. All right. And so this is part of that fluency routine. But here is a student, just listen to him as, yes, he's reading a nonfiction text, and then he's stopping and I'm asking him the questions and he's shrinking the paragraph.
Okay, tell us what the most important who or what is from that paragraph.
The turtles.
The turtles. Okay, and what's the most important thing about the turtles in that paragraph?
The predator cannot bite the hard shell.
Okay, cool. Can you say it in 10 words or less?
Predator cannot bite the hard shell of
Ooh, perfect. Okay, keep going.
Shells come in many different.
Okay, and so you can do this as a class, especially the younger the student is, the more modeling that takes. But you can do this all together as a class. Stop and shrink the paragraph. And if they can't do it, then they need to go back and read that again because maybe they weren't paying attention as they were reading, which is like can be really common maybe at first, especially as they're bridging, and really starting to work on their fluency. And so that now they can attend to the meaning. We really want to help them attend to the meaning. So paragraph shrinking is great. And you could also have students write their paragraph shrinking down. And then the shrinking to 10 words is really great because it really just forces them to narrow that down and really get the most important part of the paragraph. Another thing you can do, which is very, very similar to paragraph shrinking, but I feel like it almost kind of scaffolds it a little bit. And this is called gist statements. Now, I've heard people call gist statements and they're doing exactly the same as paragraph shrinking. This one is a little bit different because I'm giving them a few more questions, detailed questions, okay? And so we will, after we read, and we can do this all together. Of course, I'm lower grades and even upper grades, you'd probably want to do this all together, and then you can help and have students start doing it more independently. But you do the who or what of the reading, what they did, what's the important thing they did. Then you're going to add, so this makes it a little bit different than paragraph shrinking. You're going to add the when or where, and then you're going to add the why or what happened. And so what I will do is I have these up on my whiteboard, and then after we read, and this could be something we read aloud, I read to them, or it can be a text that we were reading together. Then we're going to answer these questions all together. So here's an example. We had read, all together, we had read a story on Thomas Edison. And, I had read this to them. They had Coral read it. We had partner read it. So you can do it various ways. Then we decided all together what we should put, and I wrote them up here. The students hadn't written anything. So we said, Thomas Edison, what did he do? What's the main thing he did? Because you'll have to guide this a little bit because we're talking about the whole passage. They might just say one thing like, oh, he invented the light bulb. Yeah, but the book also said other things. So maybe what could we say here that's a little more general? Okay, let's say he invented many things. When the 1800s, I skip the joiner word at first and I say why or what happened. And then depending on what we put there, we can put different joiner words that we could use. Because, so, that kind of thing. And then orally, we are going to construct sentences. So this is so great too for building that syntax. So orally, we're going to make some different ways we could combine sentences. I might model one way, and then I'm going to say, turn to your partner and come up with some different ways. And I give them time to practice constructing a sentence together. And then we come back all together. And some students want to share their sentence. So we talk about their sentence and how they made it different than someone else. Because I'll say, who has a different way that they combined those into a sentence? And then students will choose the way they like best, and they will write them in their notebooks. And so here is a couple examples of some different ways some of my students did that. So you could see the one on the left. Thomas Edison invented many things in the late 1800s so he could help people. So you can see it's right there, and that person basically did everything right in that same order. Okay, and then look at the next student. They started with the when. And so they said, in the 1800s, Thomas Edison invented many things because he wanted to help people. And so look at the joiner word they used. They used because. So this was a different way to combine it and still get the gist. And here's one more. They started with the when too. In the late 1800s, Thomas Edison invented many things to help people. So their joiner word was really just to, right? Many things to help people, and it still worked. So there's all these different ways they could do it. So I love this, and we can do it anytime we read to really help them get the gist of what they read. So we had read Whistle for Willie. And then here's what one of my students put. One day, Peter learned how to whistle so he could call his dog. So it's a great way to shrink and kind of summarize the passage or the book. Here's another one when we read Kitten's First Full Moon. This one's a little different because you can see the students wrote this. And once they learn how to do this, this was something I could have them do like more independently, where they figure out the who, the did what, the where, when, the why. And you could say, one night a kitten tried to get the moon because she thought it was a bowl of milk. So awesome. So I love this gist statements. I love doing those. Another thing, of course, we can ask them questions, to make sure they're learning as they read, but it's even better for the students to come up with a question. When the students have to come up with a question, it's going to deepen their knowledge about what they're reading, because they really have to understand what they learned and how they could flip and turn it into a question. So you can see, again, I'm just taking my district has used this Wonders program, and so I'm just taking a picture from the book that we had to read, and so we're going to stop. I mean, the first time we're going to read it, we're going to read the whole thing, and when we're stopping, we're discussing the text, and I'm asking questions and different things like that. Maybe the second or third time we read is when I'm going to stop, and I'm going to stop at the end of a page and ask them who can come up with a question from this page, and I might have to reread the page. Okay, who can come up with a question? So like you have right here, and I could model this. Like I could say, lots of worker bees help make honey. They help keep the hive clean too. Okay, I'm going to think of a question word. Let's see, it says the worker bees help make honey. If I turn that into a question, I could say, what do the worker bees do? And the answer would be to make honey. Okay, let's see. Another thing I could ask here is I could say, where do bees live? And from the text, someone could answer, oh, they live in a hive. That's their home. Okay, so let's have you do it. Put in the chat. Let's look at this page. Every hive has a queen bee. She lays all the eggs. A hive has drone bees too. A drone's job is to help the queen make eggs. So can you put in the chat a question that you could pretend like you are the students and put a question into the chat? Thank you, Anne. She put, what does the queen bee do? Wonderful. Dee says, who lays all the eggs? What is the drone's job? I love it. Look at all these questions. Wonderful. And you can scaffold this a little bit by having students, you can give them the question word. Who can think of a word that starts a question with who? What's a who question you could ask on here? What's a when question you could ask? What's a where? And you can help students if you want them to do like a text dependent. Sometimes they might ask something that can't be answered from the page, and you can say, can you do a question that someone who had just read that page would know? And then some students will struggle with this. So an additional scaffold is to shorten it down even. Good, lots of good questions in the chat, thank you. You could scaffold it down and give them just one sentence, and then just show them how they could flip that sentence into a question. So you could say, look at this, frogs live in the pond. And we're going to flip this, turn it into a question by starting with the word where. See if they could do that. And if not, you're going to help them get that a little bit. So scaffolding, but having students generate the questions is really a great way for them to really tune in to the text and make sure they're learning from it. Okay. Additionally, with vocabulary, I have shared, I love this. I learned from Dr. Deb Glazer, because with vocabulary, I'm pretty good with introducing vocabulary. I am bad at having students interact with the vocabulary words throughout the week. So this activity really helps me to make sure we are coming back to those words throughout the week. So on Monday, we'll fill out the paper. The word goes in the first column, student-friendly definition in the middle column, and a picture to represent that in the third column. You could see my student here for grasp has a pointing to the girl grasping the balloon. And that's what we'll do on Monday. And then on Tuesday, and then they're going to put these in their folders. And then on Tuesday, they pull them out and we're going to fold, like you see here, you're going to fold the pictures back and then the words on top. And so now it's like they have these little flashcards for them, little practice cards. We stand up, push the chairs in. You can turn on music, or I can just say walking, walking, walking. Students walk around the room, and then I say stop, or the music stops, and they quickly buddy up with someone close to them. And then they're going to like quiz each other. One person will choose a word on the list, the other one gives the definition, and then they switch. They'll keep going until I say walking, walking. They walk again. We stop, we do it again. And then we might do definitions one day. We might give a sentence the next day. So it's just an easy way to interact with those vocabulary words. Okay, so that I know that was really fast. So there's a lot more in the book with the 7 moves. Okay, but those are all the 7 moves. 1, teach phonemic awareness with intention. And if you were here in part 1, you know I had to move a couple times in that area. And really with all these things, I'm going to continue to move and make improvements, because as the more we know, the better we can apply things and try things. Move 2, teach that phonics explicitly and systematically. And we really talked about upping the participation of our students in those phonics lessons. Remember, I said, who's doing the work and how many practice opportunities are they getting? Move 3, decoding strategies, not cueing strategies. And I shared those prompts I give students when they come to a word they don't know. That was in part 1, and you can watch the recording if you missed it. Move 4, decodable text instead of predictable text with beginning readers. And remember, we don't overcorrect. We still scaffold students into regular text as soon as they're ready. And then in this section, we've talked about move 5, better approach to teaching sight words. We don't need to just memorize them as a whole, but we can have students match the sounds they hear with the letters they see with the meaning of the word. Move 6 is that meaningful fluency practice. We talked about me, we reading, a little bit about partner reading, paragraph shrinking, and you have some links if you want to learn more about that. And move 7, improving that comprehension by developing vocabulary and background knowledge, is an area I was weak in before. And that's one way to help with comprehension. We know there's so many things with comprehension, and comprehension strategies help too. There's a lot of things there we could talk about. Now, what I want to say, and this is so important, because it can be really overwhelming to think that you have to make all these changes at once and you have to do all these things. And so what I want to tell you is that perfection is not required, okay? And it might be messy at first, and you might try something and might not be well, or you might do something and then you hear someone say something online and you're like, oh, did I do that wrong? Now I need to change a thing. Listen, perfection's not required, and you will get better, and you have to go out on a limb and try things and choose one thing at a time, and choose one thing. Say, I'm going to try this, and then, okay, I've got a handle on this. Now I'm going to add this, and now I'm going to add this, and just don't get overwhelmed, because I know it's easy to do, and we all have to learn to have grace with ourselves and with others, because we're all at different places in our learning journey. So if you remember one thing today, please remember that so you don't have to be perfect at first. Well, you don't have to be perfect, I should say. You don't have to be perfect, but keep an open mind and always be willing to learn and try new things. All right. We have some time for some questions. So thinking about questions, you could put those in the chat and I'll look at them in just a minute. If I don't get to your question or you have something else, you can reach out to me, or you can follow me on these different social media platforms and you can reach out to me. I also have a contact info on my website, lindsaykemeny.com, and you can reach me that way. And I'm the co-host of the Literacy Talks podcast. So you're welcome to join me there as well.